So, on behalf of Jewish Unity Through Diversity Institute, I am really excited today to be speaking about a community who we speak about a lot, but aren't often spoken about. It's the Bene Israel community and the Baghdadi community in India. Mostly, we're focusing on Ann Samson's story. So thank you very much for joining us today, Ann. And thank
Thank
you,
you.
Paushali Last, for helping to tell Ann's story as well as researching and sharing the story of the Indian Jews in general. And it's just so beautiful when we can bring together different cultures and customs and share them and really help celebrate. It's a
Mhm.
celebration. It's a celebration of people from different backgrounds,
Mhm.
whether you grew up in the same country, the same city, or in different ones, whether you're the same religion, the same race, I don't know what else, the same everything or
Same
different everything.
everything.
And it's just beautiful to be able to come together and share our stories. So we really appreciate your coming together. I would not do justice to your stories, so I am going to immediately hand over the floor to you and ask you to introduce yourselves the way you deserve to be introduced. And those who are watching, please do continue to put some comments and questions in the chat. I will go to Dark, and it's all over to you, Paushali and Anne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the lovely introduction just to the afternoon, morning, evening, afternoon, I don't know, wherever people are. Um, I'm Paushali and I live in Germany, but I just want to share my screen so that we can get started with the, sorry. Okay, so
Perfect.
you're here because of our book that Ann Samson and I have written on Tasting Faith, it's called. And my name is Paushali. So that's
And
me, and that's
and
Ann
I'm at.
Samson, and I'll let her speak in a minute. I'm actually from India originally, but I've lived in Germany most of my life, with in between stops in the UK and Singapore. And I have always been fascinated with the Jewish story, the Jews of India. And the city that I was born in, Calcutta, it had a strong Baghdadi Jewish presence, and we're going to talk about it later. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me, and I'll let Anne continue, and then we can talk more about what the book is about. And over to you, Anne.
Okay. My name is Ann Samson, and I live in Toronto now, but I was born in India, in Bombay, and had a foot in two communities, as I will explain soon. Um, and I'll go into much more detail as we move through the slides, and you'll hear much more from me. Okay, so I won't repeat myself.
Okay. All right. So we brought out this book, which was officially launched in Jerusalem 2 months ago. And the book is mainly, well, we're going to obviously talk about the whole book today, but um, in a nutshell, it's a book that seeks to shine light on a lesser known Jewish community, the Jews of India. And I know, as Dora mentioned, that maybe among the Jewish communities, especially in Israel, there's more awareness and talk about the Jews of India. But I live in Europe and in Germany, and hardly anybody knows about the Jews of India. So every time I talk about the Jews of India, they just stare at me, what planet do you come from? So I wanted to share or shine light on this community. And the communities also may not be that well known in India. So that's why we just want to talk about the Jews of India. And I think it's very important to talk about this community because we live in a world where increasingly there's anti-Israel sentiments and people try to show as if like the Jews are from Europe alone. So we want to counter that, but it's more about celebrating the Jewish culture and carrying on and maintaining the cultural heritage by sharing stories. So, in setting the stage, just a little bit about me and why I came to write the book. Um, so, I grew up in India, I was born and brought up in, well, Calcutta and in New Delhi. And from my childhood, I just loved everything Jewish and the Jewish culture, people, and whatever connection I had. So it was always very like my friends in Israel say I have a Jewish soul. I can only explain it that way. I don't know. There's this curiosity. And then years later, fast forward about like when I was 20 or so in the UK and I was studying there, and I actually became a Christian. And I got to know that the more I explored, I realized, the strong Jewish roots of the Christian faith, and that is what I got really drawn to. And that's where my connection really deepened and connection to Israel and the Jewish community and my unwavering support for Israel. So that's why I wanted to really make sure that this story is told, the story of the Jews from the country that I come from. Yeah, so that's a little bit about my background. And now, Anne, if you would share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my years growing up in Bombay were very happy. One, surrounded by the love of my family, my friends, and the Jewish community. I always felt I belonged there, and that gave me a real sense of security, and it shaped my identity. My husband and I immigrated to Canada in '66, and it was our very negative experiences here within the Canadian Jewish community, in fact, that made me realize when I spoke to Paushali why the history and existence of Jews in India was extremely important to share, not just with the communities here in North America, but with a wider community base, maybe worldwide. India was extremely important to us. But when I came here, this became my passion. Since my Indian degrees were not recognized, I had to redo all my university courses starting from year one. And then in '77, I was granted a sabbatical, and I decided to go to India and do some research, in-depth research, and study more about the Jewish communities in India. On my return, I became an advocate and voice for the Indian Jews, starting in Toronto, and then in other cities, and then even in cities in the US. Okay.
Okay, so today, of course, we are going to talk about the Jews of India, but we are not going to really focus on the history because one can easily pick up a book on the Jews of the different communities. But there are mainly, the Jews of India are divided into communities. So you have the Kochini, the Baghdadi, Bene Israel, Bene Menashe of the northeast part of India, Bene Ephraim, who are from the southeast Andhra Pradesh state of India, or Telangana. And then, and then each community has their own adaptation of food and sticking to the kashrut laws. But because Anne is from two of the communities, we are going to focus on that, the Baghdadi and the Bene Israel. Now, quickly, I just wanted to bring this to attention of the people that, in Megillat Esther, in the Tanakh, in the Bible, we see from the book of Esther that even like all those years ago, 2,500 years ago or so, there were Jews living in India. So it says here, in the Persian Empire at that time, there were Jews living from India to Ethiopia or India to Nubia. So I just wanted to highlight the fact that there were Jews living in India for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, now Anne,
Yeah.
the space is yours to share your story.
Okay. These are pictures of, the first one is of me on the far left as a baby. And quite frankly, my mother cut up her wedding dress and made that dress that I'm wearing. So it's from her wedding dress. Okay, I was a very big fat baby, but not anymore, hopefully. And the middle picture is when I was about, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 years old. And it's one that in the old days, you didn't get colored film, but it was colored. I don't know how they did it. Okay, and they replicated my dress. The one on the far right, you will see my parents, my Bnei Israel father, and my Yemenite or Baghdadi mother, and me as a little girl. I was born in Bombay in 1941 during the Second World War and British rule in India. My mother's name was Matucha, her Hebrew name, which means gift or blessing in Hebrew. Some say Matuka, and they say that means sweet. But her anglicized name that everybody used was Matilda. And so she was Matilda Aaron. My father, who was Bnei Israel, was named Menachem Solomon Chincholker. And I'm not going into details about the last name. Maybe in the Q&A you can ask me and I'll explain. The Bnei Israel came to India sometime between 732 to 730 BCE. So in other words, they left or they were cut off from the mainstream of Jewry prior to the Second Temple. According to some historians who have done a lot of research, when the Assyrians attacked the tribes, they were just a small group of Jews that were living in Elat, and they had a choice, either stay and fight and be killed because they were totally outnumbered by the Assyrians, or escape by sea. And the story goes that they chose to escape by sea, and they were making for the port of Ophir, which we believe was in India, because one of the things they traded during the time of King Solomon was with the port of Ophir, and they brought back peacocks, one of the items, besides spices and other items. And peacocks are indigenous to India, not to Africa. Okay. So, but when they were very near the coast of India, there was a severe storm and they were blown off course and they were shipwrecked on the eastern coast of India, just south of Bombay. I won't go into more detail with that history. The Baghdadi Jews came to India in the late 1700s. They were fleeing persecution in the Muslim countries that they had actually resided in peacefully for many years. The term Baghdadi includes Jews from Iraq, Yemen, Oman, Persia, and Syria. And they settled in India, primarily in Bombay and Calcutta. My maternal grandmother was from Iraq. And yet I know that she had family members who sometimes came from other places like Oman or other areas around there. And my grandfather was from Yemen. My father's family were all Bnei Israel, and they did not approve of his marriage to a Baghdadi girl. And they never really accepted my mother or me, which was unfortunate. So, but my mother's family were very welcoming, accepted us both. And so I grew up closer to my mother's family than my father's family. Part of the problem was I didn't speak Marathi. I only spoke English. So I could read and write Marathi because I had to study it in school, but I had a mental block when it came to speaking. So that was a stumbling block for me. My maternal grandparents, my parents and I attended the Iraqi Magen David synagogue in Bombay all along. It was run on Orthodox lines. We had a mechitza with the men downstairs and the women upstairs. Only men could read, only men could, go to the Torah. The men had all the privileges and the women just sat and watched. We had every synagogue in India actually was built with its own mikvah. We did not have one mikvah for the community. It was separate. Every synagogue had its own. Married women covered their heads when they entered the synagogue or whenever they were praying, even at home. And men, as all men, wore kippah. All my schooling was done at a private all-girls day school run by the nuns. Although my mother had attended the Jewish day school. She felt that the discipline in that school was not good enough for her daughter. And I was an only child, so you can figure that out. I had students of all religious denominations in my class and throughout the school. This experience taught me to be respectful and to accept all religious groups. I personally never once experienced anti-Semitism while growing up in India. I attended St. Xavier's College for my BA honors in psychology and St. Xavier's Institute of Education for my BEd. After we immigrated to Canada and settled in Toronto, we were blessed with 2 daughters, Sabrina, Rebecca, and Fleur Shulamith. Faced with the reality of my Indian credentials not being recognized, I chose to pursue further education and start all over again, and earned a Bachelor of Arts in sociology from York University in Toronto. And let me tell you, balancing the demands of raising a young family, teaching and guiding students at school, and then coming home, helping and teaching and guiding my own daughters at home, it was not that easy. I eventually graduated with the Master of Science in Education from Niagara University, and that paved the way for me to become a principal finally of a junior public school in Toronto. We'll go to the next slide.
Mhm.
Okay, the one on the left, you can tell, is a picture taken in November of 1962 when Solomon Samson and I were married at the Magen David Synagogue. On the right are my parents on my wedding day. Okay. The next photograph was taken during the Shiva Brachot. And you can see we're under the canopy. You can see fresh flowers all the way around. Okay, and it's in the synagogue on the bima. Okay. Here in this photograph, you can see members of our 2 families, my husband's and mine. The top left is my Yemenite grandfather, whose Hebrew name was Said Nissim Aaron. The bottom right, all the way down on the right, that very stern-looking lady was my grandmother from Iraq. And her name was Khanim. And it was anglicized because of the British to Kitty. The bottom left, wearing a sari with glasses, is my grandmother, my father's mother, Penina Solomon Chincholkar. Above her is my Bnei Israel mother-in-law, Solomon's mother, Rebecca Samson Kilekar. They both wore saris, as you can see. They continued to wear saris all their life. This right at the top right, is Ezra Samson Kilekar, Solomon's father. He's riding that horse because he was an excise inspector and worked in the villages for the British police. Now, the silver Kiddush cup that you see there on the far right belonged to my Yemenite grandfather and is 100 years old now. We use it lovingly every Shabbat and holiday, except during Passover. Okay. Now, here is a picture of David Sassoon. He's seated, and 3 of his 8 sons, Elias on the left, Abdullah in the center, who changed his name to Albert, and Sassoon on the right. He had more than those 3 sons. There were 8 sons in all, but only 3 are in this photograph. David Sassoon was born in 1792 in Baghdad. He settled with his family in Bombay in 1832. He was a businessman. He never changed his mode of dress. He dressed that way when he arrived from Baghdad, and he dressed that way to the day he died. But his sons eventually, after his death primarily, changed and switched over to wearing suits. Sassoon was wearing a suit in this picture because he had just been to England on business, and he decided he would wear a suit. The Sassoons were the wealthy benefactors of both the Baghdadi Jewish community in Bombay and the wider community too. They built the modern port of Bombay, schools, libraries, hospitals, museums, colleges, etc. They started the Sassoon textile mills, purchased land for the Baghdadi cemetery that is still operational in Bombay. The Sassoons established a home for the aged, built the Sir Jacob Sassoon Free High School, and it wasn't until the 1920s that Bnei Israel students were admitted and Bnei Israel teachers were hired. The Sassoons built 2 synagogues in Bombay. The first was Magen David, that was built in 1861, and Knesset Eliyahu, which was built in 1884. But because they also had a home and often went to Pune, which is like a hill station, or it's like you saying you go to the cottage here. Well, that was their cottage. David Sassoon built Ohel David Synagogue in Pune in 1863. The synagogues were always within walking distance of their residence because they were Orthodox. David Sassoon built the Gothic-style Sassoon General Hospital in Pune for all denominations. In Bombay, he provided food for the hungry, established the David Sassoon Industrial and Reformatory Institute in 1857. It was a school for juvenile offenders who were taught the trade and then placed in a place of business, so they found jobs for them. He was loved and respected by the British. The Sassoons established many more charities and trusts that are still operating today. David was a very religious man and studied Talmud every evening. His businesses were closed on Saturday so that all his Jewish employees could observe Shabbat. He died on November 5th, 1864 in Pune and is buried on the grounds of the Ohel David Synagogue. His tombstone bears the Sassoon family crest. The Sassoons have often been called the Rothschilds of the East. Their business empire spread out from Shanghai and Hong Kong and all the way through Persia and other places in the Middle East, East Africa, Persia, and extended all the way to England. So that's why they were referred to as the Rothschilds. When the British left India in 1947, the Sassoons left too and settled in England. Many of the Sassoons were knighted. Moving to the photograph on the right. The picture on the right shows a little known fact that many European Jews fleeing from the Nazis in Europe found a safe haven in Bombay during the Second World War. They were mainly professionals, such as doctors, scientists, dentists. They were welcomed and worked in their respective fields. And when the war ended, many left India for the USA, England, and Australia. A very few stayed in India until they died.
Okay, now we come to a very interesting and exciting part of this talk, which is about Anne's experience from India to Canada, and talk to us about the challenges you faced and how it is today.
Yeah. Unfortunately, when we landed here in Toronto, we faced many challenges in being accepted by the existing Jewish community. They did not believe we were Jewish. We were often told, "You don't look Jewish." And I started to wonder, what am I supposed to look like anyway? Or I was told, "You cannot be Jewish because there are no Jews in India." Or they said, "You must be a convert. You must have converted." And when I would say no, they would say, "Oh, then someone in your family must have converted." And I would still say no. It was as if there was an invisible line drawn, I don't know, somewhere in the Middle East. And it was as if Jews never crossed that line and never went further east. Dealing with the rejection we experienced in Toronto was very new to us and something we had never experienced in our lives before. How do you prove to people who don't believe you're Jewish that you are Jewish? I don't know. But there were two significant events that occurred that had a profound effect on my husband and me. The first was the rejection, beating, name calling, and discrimination our daughters experienced in the 70s at the Jewish day school and later at a conservative synagogue that we joined. These experiences upset my husband and me. And what was even more troubling was when our daughters proceeded to inform us that they did not want to have anything more to do with the Jewish community and refused to come for any services after that. The second incident was when a young Ben Israel boy suddenly died on January 18th, 1975, due to hepatitis. And no Jewish organization in Toronto would give us a cemetery plot for this boy. Everywhere my husband went, he was told, "How do we know if you're really Jewish? We can't give you a plot." At the end of the day, he went to Chabad, and they were the only ones who gave a cemetery plot, no questions asked. Then the mother of the boy who died went that same year to buy tickets for high holidays from a local conservative synagogue, but that was within walking distance of their house. And when she went there to purchase it, she had the money. And all they wanted was for her husband to be able to say Kaddish for the son. She was told that she was in the wrong place. She did not belong there, must leave, and was unceremoniously ushered out. I was very angry when I heard that. Facing such racial prejudice, for the very first time, I decided to face these biases head on. It was then that my leadership extended beyond education to religious and community services, which I was not involved in before. All these negative experiences hardened my resolve to start our own Indian Jewish high holiday services, at least Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I felt I had to prove to my children that they had nothing to be ashamed of, but had a rich Jewish heritage of which they could be very proud. I began to work with a few other Indian Jewish families, and we held our first high holiday services in 1979. By 1981, we registered Congregation Bina in Ontario as a charitable organization. As you know, Bina in Hebrew means understanding. Despite various challenges we have faced over the years, my dedication to Bina has never wavered, and it has been in existence now for 44 years, although the services we've held for 46 consecutive years. I also was, when I was on that sabbatical, when I was given a sabbatical in 1977, I went to India to study the communities and do an in-depth study. And when I came back, I presented a paper here, a white paper on the Jews of India. This led to my being invited to present my paper at the First World Conference on Jewish Family Heritage in Jerusalem in 1981, where I shared the story of the Indian Jews on the global stage. And the acknowledgement it received motivated me to continue. Over the years, I've been privileged to address Jewish and interfaith audiences in Canada and the USA, fostering a greater understanding of our unique heritage. I have also addressed university students at both York and Toronto. After retiring in 1998, I organized Jewish trips to India. Despite all these efforts, you'd think it would make a big difference, but not completely. A friend's daughter who was attending an Orthodox Jewish high school here recently experienced her teacher relating to the class a list of Jews from all over the diaspora. but the teacher never mentioned India. So this child informed the teacher that she had left out the Jews of India. The teacher's response was, "There are no Jews in India." And the child was arguing, but each time the teacher said, "There are no Jews in India." So finally, the student said, "I am an Indian Jew. My grandfather was a Jew from India." The teacher still insisted. So at that point, frustrated, she said, "So you are saying I do not exist as a Jew?" Unfortunately, that was rude. And she was sent to the principal's office where she was reprimanded for being rude to the teacher. However, I personally am very proud of her for standing up for herself. Paushali, it's all yours.
Okay,
Oh,
we
this is
have
a
a couple of
picture
photos to show. That's
yeah,
Ann's
this is a
family.
picture of our family, my family.
Yeah.
Okay, on the far left is my daughter Sabrina. Beside her is her husband, Mark Kerbel. That's my husband, Solomon, and myself. And then on the far right, you've got the bridegroom, Ari Kapulkin, and the bride, my daughter, Fleur
Mhm.
Samson. And in this picture, we've got, we have a henna. Both the Iraqi and the Beni Israelis do a henna prior to the wedding. This is Sabrina's henna at our home. And on the far left, you've got two pictures of Sabrina and Fleur in their henna outfits.
Cool. Very nice. And
On the right, sorry. Okay. This is my Passover Seder plate. And the items that you see on the Seder plate are really what we make for and use for the Seder. The charoset, as you can see, was made from dates, and as the Baghdadi Jews, it's made as a molasses or thick liquid. The Bnei Israel made it the way it is shown in the recipe that you have in the book.
Mhm.
And that their way is much easier, I can tell you that.
Okay.
To the right
Oh,
is
sorry.
the Hanukkah of my parents, and that's 85 years old. And I still have it.
Well, thank you so much. I'll just briefly mention one thing, and then I'll move to what Anne mentioned about her experience in Canada. But first, I just wanted to quickly highlight, I was born in the city of Calcutta, which had a lot of Baghdadi Jews at some point. But more importantly, the contribution that the Jews made to the city, which unfortunately many people in Calcutta thought they were like from colonial British or Christian structures. They were not actually. Like, if anybody's been to Calcutta, there are a couple of streets like Ezra Street and also the Esplanade Mansion. They are very, very famous, and they were all Jewish contributions. But the most famous Jewish contribution in Calcutta, it's kind of like a legend. It's almost in the Bengali, which is the region where Calcutta is. It's kind of in Bengali's blood, is Nahum's cakes. It's interesting because Nahum is a Jewish family. It's a Baghdadi Jewish, Iraqi Jewish family, and it's more than 120 years old, this bakery. And they were famous for making Christmas cakes. And so I want to highlight this because Calcutta is a city which is known for its coexistence of different faiths. You have Christians, Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Sikh, Buddhists, everybody living together. And we grew up like respecting one another's faith, but being true to our own selves, and that is quite unique. And the other thing about Calcutta is like the two beautiful synagogues are also maintained by Muslim caretakers. Now, this is quite a like role model for the world, actually, current state of the world. And the other thing is that a couple of years ago, when I was in India, I saw there is this school called the Talmud Torah School, which is a Jewish school, of course, but it's now frequented only by Muslims. I, in fact, saw hijab covered Muslim ladies picking up their children from the Torah Talmud school, so which is quite unique. Now, I don't know what's happened after 7th of October. Um, but this is the history of India, as Anne also mentioned. She never faced any anti-Semitism in India. I can't really think of any incident growing up in India where there was any negative feeling towards the Jews. In fact, quite the opposite.
Mhm.
Now, based on what Anne said in her talk about the lack of awareness of Jewish Indian Jews in the world, I'll just quickly mention something. It's all there in our book. One of the challenges that we identified was, of course, the lack of awareness of the Jewish diversity in North America and Europe. I live in Europe and in Canada, and so this is something that we found, and also erasure of non-European Jewish histories. There was also the um, Holocaust, of course, was one of the darkest chapters in the history of the world, but there were also Farhud pogrom and other
Mhm.
aspects, where the Jews were persecuted that not many people know about. And we need to really include that in the Jewish education. First the Jews, and then only then when they are empowered, they can also share the information with non-Jews. So we have mentioned some of our suggestions are in the book. And one of the things that we've also spoken about it with Drora, actually talking about celebration of cultures. We organizing things like festivals which celebrate the different Jewish cultures, and among them the Indian Jewish culture, which is so rich with fantastic food and different outfits, colorful. So, one can easily have a festival to make the awareness come to the fore in a more like a non-intimidating manner. So we would highly recommend this so that more people in Europe and North America know that there are these Jewish communities. There were Jews in India. They're very legitimate people. Okay. And would you just briefly share, because I'm aware of the time and we do want to talk
Mhm.
about the food, what Israel means to you, just in a few
That's what it
sentences?
means. We always considered ourselves guests in India, okay, and we were all raised to believe that our true home was in Jerusalem. That is why for thousands of years, I think Jews all over the world have ended the Passover Seder with the words, which are a prayer actually, or even a hope. And it's Leshana Haba'ah Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. It expresses their longing to return to their ancestral homeland, from where they were forcibly removed time and time again throughout history. So we Jews actually have a 3,000 years of sort of continuous connection to the land of Israel. That's why it is so important to share the story and to not let it be erased. Okay.
Yeah,
In
and
this
you've
picture,
also
I've
had
just, yeah,
relatives fighting in the War of Independence, right?
yes. Yeah. So this picture shows I had, two of my dad's cousins went to Israel in 1947. Now, that was Daniel and Walter Goslin. This is a picture of Daniel Goslin that I took when I was there in the early 1970s. But he was there much earlier. When I was there, he was living in Kfar Blum on the kibbutz in the Upper Galilee. And he fought in the War of Independence, he and his brother. Okay, so there have been Indian Jews there right from the very beginning.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges they may have faced initially and what came out of that?
Yes, the unfortunately, like the Baghdadi Jews had no problem because they had records and things from Baghdad and all of that. The Bnei Israel Jews, unfortunately, on the other hand, because of their being cut off from the mainstream of Jewry so early, didn't have written records, but they had followed biblical Judaism. Okay, very much so. So their Jewishness was doubted by the Orthodox rabbis in Israel. The Ben Israel themselves believed that this was primarily because they were dark-skinned and they spoke Marathi and their women wore saris. However, it was also because they had no written historical records and traditions had been handed down orally from generation to generation. As I said, they practiced biblical Judaism that existed prior to the Second Temple. Therefore, they never followed or practiced some of the rules, like they never believed in intermarriage. If a girl or a boy married outside, they tore their clothes, they sat shiva, and the child was never allowed to enter the house again, not to be buried in the Jewish cemetery either. Okay, they did not practice the custom of Khalisa. Okay, and maybe if you don't know what Khalisa is, we can do it in the Q&A, and I'll explain it to you. But the Bnei Israel widows never remarried, so Khalisa did not really. And this went on for years and years, the fight to be recognized as Jews. And finally, it was the Sephardic rabbi in the end had to send a letter to the Bnei Israel community in 1998, stating that the Bnei Israel are authentic Jews for any purpose and any matter, and are allowed to join the community and carry on with all Israel according to the faith of Moses and Israel, without any doubt and without any need for any investigation and findings.
Okay, great. So more questions in the Q&A can come up and we can answer. But I do want to highlight this topic about the culinary heritage of the Jews, because that's one of the ways of maintaining, preserving, and carrying forward your culture, right? And I find this really, really interesting. And if anybody knows anything about the history of Indian food, you'll know that Indian food has been shaped by various waves of settlers, and Jews were one of them. And Jews, as we know, wherever they went in the diaspora, they adopted. So the Jews of India also came and they adopted to the local ingredients and spices. So that is quite unique about the Indian Jewish food, is the use of spices. Now, just to give an example, also the Iraqi Jews, many of you know the Shabbat food of Tibet. That's this chicken rice cooked, slow cooked with tomato paste. And they would use Baharat spice. But when they came to India, the Baghdadi Jews also put in like a whole spices like cardamom and cloves, which was very common. And you would also have regional variations between the Bnei Israel in the West, who use more of the coconut milk, and the Baghdadi Jews in the East in Calcutta, they would use more of like fresh coriander, green chilies, and things. So so the main thing is that the use of spices. Now, Anne, you can share in a minute. Just
You want me
maybe
to talk about the Malida?
the Shabbat and the Malida.
Okay, I'll very briefly tell you about Shabbat. Like a Friday night was very important to the families, both in the Bnei Israel and the Baghdadi community. They met around the dinner table to light the Shabbat oil lamps and chant the prayers and sing the Shabbat songs. For Kiddush, both communities first soaked and then boiled black currants, and then you had to sit and squeeze it out of the cheesecloth. And children were often asked to do that task, and we always tried to avoid it. For Hamutzi, we did not have challah like you have here, but we had a Yemenite flatbread cooked in the tandoor. That was for the Iraqi, the Baghdadi community. The Bnei Israel made Hamutzi in the house. They made it from wheat flour. It was like a chapati, but it was made more crisp. The Iraqi Jews usually prepared one fish dish and kubba. Kubba was popular. Kubba is meat-filled dumplings. That's what they are. They're dumplings filled with meat, cooked in either a sweet and sour broth or spicy curry with rice, some vegetables, and salad. The Bnei Israel usually prepared also a fish dish and had chicken curry, rice, vegetables, and salad. There were many other foods that I don't think we couldn't cover everything in the book. Chitarni was very popular with the Iraqi Jews. Okay, and aloo makala, that's potatoes, and they were done so well. They were like crisp on the outside, soft on the inside. And when you went to poke the fork into it, sometimes they would fly. And so we used to call them as children jumping potatoes. For Shabbat lunch, okay, that's on Saturday afternoon, because Saturday morning everybody went to service. The Baghdadi Jews made hamim. That's what Paushali was referring to. They made hamim with chicken, rice, and spices, and sometimes put whole eggs in there to bake overnight. just like the Ashkenazi Jews make cholent for Shabbat. Okay, we made hamim. Hilbeh was made to accompany hamim, and hilbeh is made from the fenugreek powder. Okay, on Saturday nights now, after Havdalah, the Bnei Israel often held what is called the Malida. And people often ask, what is the Malida? Well, it's an Eliyahu Hanavi ritual. They firmly believed in and had a lot of faith in Eliyahu Hanavi. It is a Thanksgiving service where we thank Hashem for all the good things that have happened to us. And so this ceremony was held on all happy occasions, such as an engagement, at the henna celebration, or after recovering from a long serious illness. It was developed by the Bnei Israel since they no longer had the temple where offerings could be made. It is adopted from chapters of Leviticus, Vayikra, and was the practice of the Kohanim. So that they have this platter with sweet-scented flowers or cloves for Borei Mine Besamim. They have 2 fruits of the tree, such as dates and apples for Borei Pri Ha'etz, and 2 sets of fruit from the soil. It could be bananas and melon for Borei Pri Ha'adama, or any other fruit that falls into one of the 2 categories. 1 new seasonal fruit could be added if you wished, as long as it was being eaten for the first time in that season. And this may be either Ha'etz or Hadama. Parched, now this, if you notice, there's parched rice in the center. The parched rice, sweetened with sugar and raisins and finely cut pistachios, are added. This is the meal offering, which is called Melida. And all Melida means is sharing generously. Okay? And we recite here the blessing, Borei Mine Mezunot, on that. And the ceremony then is concluded with the blessing to the younger generation by the elders of the community. It is the blessing that Jacob gave to his grandchildren, Ephraim and Menashe, sons of Joseph. Okay? And if you want to know what that blessing is, I can tell you in the Q&A.
Yeah. So I just want to, this is just a photo of, this is how often
This
like
is the
Bnei
curry.
Israel or Baghdadi Jewish curries, as we call it, would look like, with meat and with lots of spices. And we have tons of recipes. Well, not tons really, but a lot of recipes of the Indian Jewish communities. So biryani, you have the very
Popular.
intensive, like Yom Kippur puris, which are 7-layered, like crispy, filled puris.
Yeah, they're puris.
Fried bread. So you have the recipes. So Anne has been very generous in sharing the recipes. I also have my own recipes, and some of Anne's friends and relatives have also shared, for which we are very thankful.
Yeah.
So I think food is a wonderful way of preserving culture and memories, and we do hope that you will get our book. It's available online on Amazon, and then you can try out the recipes. So thank you so much for listening, and now we are open to questions.
Thank you so much, Paushali and Anne. There was a lot in there and a lot to unpack. There were some comments throughout. I'm going to kind of summarize them and put them a little bit. First, before we even do that, I have to, I want to encourage those who are watching, continue to put comments and questions. Now is a good time to do it because now we can ask them. So please do add to the comments and questions. I just have to say, every time I hear about the Magen David synagogue, I get very excited because I stayed there for a while. So I get good memories there. So you have a lot of positive thank yous. I want to put that out there. I want to also mention that this is really a story of discrimination and pride and overcoming. And so it's something that we talk about a lot in our organization, and we really appreciate this, and we appreciate your sharing it as well, because education is the key, as we've been saying throughout. Of course, food is part of education, because if we do it through our senses, those are really the way to do it. So I really appreciate your opening up and sharing your story, and helping to share both of your stories actually, because you're seeing it from different viewpoints. So we have quite a few people saying some of the little. I don't know if you're okay. Kavita said that he would just say hello and tell a little bit, like 2 minutes of their story, if that's okay. So I'm going to invite him to join. And then there were things that you said you wanted to come. Oh, I wanted to ask you. You said that Melida means sharing generously. Is that's correct? The meaning of the word?
Yes.
And
That's what it refers to.
so I had always understood that it was part of Tu B'Shvat. So it's just a ceremony in general. It became connected to Tu B'Shvat afterwards.
You can do it for Tu B'Shvat, yet we do it, okay, a little differently at Tu B'Shvat.
So the part that's the ending that you said is the blessing of Jacob to his sons. That's done in every Melida?
Pardon?
That's done in every Melida?
Yeah, in
The-
every Malida, the elders give this blessing to the younger generations. Okay.
The same as
The
like
same
quoting
as-
from Jacob.
Yeah, it's the Hamalach HaGoel.
Perfect.
Mhm.
I'm looking, oh, I also thought it was very interesting, the Chilbe part. For those who don't know, that's a very Yemenite thing as well. So is that something that Indians in general are using, or that's because you have some Yemenite heritage?
When you say, what did you say it was?
The Chilbe.
The Helbe. Yeah, that's what we ate at home. And a lot of the Baghdadi community in Bombay used to make it.
The Baghdadi
Bahami.
community.
Yeah,
Interesting.
everybody made it. Yeah.
And did you have a Jewish education there as well? Because you said that you went to the school with the nuns.
Yeah, I didn't go to Jewish day school, but I had a tutor at home.
And was that normal that most of the
It was
Jews?
normal for someone who didn't go to the Jewish day school, but the tutors were not very kind.
And then, well, unfortunately, I think that's a pattern. I'm not going to get into that at all.
No.
But there's a question also about the next generation. So does the next generation, you mentioned that they disconnected for a while. Is there a sense of pride now in the next generation or two after that they reconnect?
Yes, yes. I'm happy to say that like both my daughters have married Ashkenazi Jews in the end. And the family that had lost their son, all the children are married to Jewish partners, and they're very Orthodox. Okay.
So there's much more of an acceptance now in there.
Yeah. Oh, like I fought so tirelessly to get Indian Jews to gain an equal footing with the Canadian Jewish community. And we finally succeeded. Congregation Bina finally succeeded and is recognized now as a member of UJA, the United Jewish Appeal.
Very nice.
Okay, in Canada. And Bina has purchased cemetery plots in Pardes Shalom Cemetery and also at Pardes Chaim Cemetery. So our people are never refused a cemetery plot. I made sure that happened. Okay. And one of the things we do, we participate in joint Shabbat services with other congregations at their request. Okay. And then they get to hear our melodies a little.
One of the things that came up in the conversation, and then I'm going to ask Paushali a question, but one more for Anne first. That you talked about discrimination also within or between the Jewish communities in India itself.
Yeah.
And so Jennifer is asking if the different Jewish communities in India were not supportive of marrying each other, how did younger generations find enough people to marry when they were still in India? I guess based on your family, they married out, but it's
Actually, it's strange because my mother's family, my grandmother was so determined, and because she attended Magen David, and it was like Magen David synagogue was only for the Baghdadi Jews, and when her one younger daughter, met this Ben Israel boy who graduated as a doctor, and the two of them wanted to get married, my grandmother adamantly refused. Okay. And someone that was there at the time, he was Abraham, who became principal of the Jewish Day School in the end. Shalom Abraham told me about my grandmother, and he said she was feisty and she was so determined not to agree. And he said we had to work on her so much until she finally agreed. And then after she agreed, she insisted that the wedding would be at Magen David. But they had never had a Ben Israel wedding at Magen David, right? And she got her way.
That's what breaking barriers are about, right? Because I know the schools were different. There was the Kaduri school and the
Yes,
Sassoon school, and you had to be separate.
Jacob Sassoon. And it all started when, the Sassoons didn't understand the Bnei Israel.
Mhm.
And when Kehemka, who wrote the first history of the Bnei Israel, he was not a researcher, he was not a historian, but he just wrote from stories he had heard and memory. And he wrote a book on the Bnei Israel, and he wrote a book on the Baghdadi Jews in India. And he went to David Sassoon because he needed funding to publish the books. And David Sassoon, and to the Sassoons, I don't know, it wasn't David Sassoon,
Right.
it was one of his sons. And they refused him.
Right. And
So
that's, as
history-
Jennifer notes, that happened in many different communities.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, she's talking about the Ethiopian community. I know even my
Mhm.
grandparents, one from Hungary, one from Czechoslovakia, they said, no, they can't.
No.
Unfortunately, but hopefully now we're breaking barriers. We're past
Yeah.
that. We're educating. We're understanding. And in that vein, coming from a very different background, Paushali, I wanted to ask how your family and how your friend group accepts your extreme interest in this. And I know your passion, I'm going to say passion, if that's okay, your passion for this topic, the whole Indian Jewish connection. So that's.
Well, I think they are fine. They encourage. I have a very encouraging and supportive husband, who encourages me in every endeavor I do, and they can clearly see my, as you say, passion, really. And I think they know that it's very important, integral part of my faith, just Zionism, Judaism, and they're curious, but I think they find it also interesting that how many things through me they have discovered about Calcutta themselves, the Jewish Calcutta and all those things. So, yeah, and a very interesting thing I have to mention here is my mother, shortly after 7th of October, she said, "Oh, you're going to Israel?" Because since the war started, I've been to Israel many times. And my mother every time says, well, take me with you. I said, how can you? I mean, she's not well. And, said, how? I mean, you can't even move properly. What if there is a siren? And what will you do? And she says, no, then I'll just die and get buried there. So there is this, I don't know, there is this inherent love and something we have towards the Jewish people, Israel. And I'm very, very happy and proud to say that India was a good host when the Jews lived, by and large, what we know of. Yeah. So.
Is it okay to ask one more question? Because one more came in. This is, I think, to you, Anne. How
Yes.
did the non-Jewish Canadians, you talked about the Jewish community accepting you and not accepting you when you came to Canada. How did the other communities accept you?
Yeah. Well, not very well, because in the 60s, they looked down on, like, they were so pro-European that they looked down on anyone coming from Asia. Okay, and Indians were, I'll give you an example. We bought a house in Willowdale, and it was in an area which was 75% Jewish or more. Okay, but when we moved in, the day we moved in, I noticed some of the residents like walking up and down the street on the opposite side. And I didn't figure out what they were up to. And then a few months later, another neighbor of mine, Jewish neighbor, said to me, you know, they were very upset because they've heard that an Indian family was moving in here. And even though we were told you were Jewish, but they felt, you know, Indians and the house will smell and a property will not be kept up and our property values will go down and, you know, all this kind of nonsense. And so they actually had a social worker come to my house to check us out,
Wow.
you know, and the social worker came and she walked through the house and she saw the, you know, everything, and she saw my kids and she said, I don't see anything wrong, you know, but there are those stereotypes,
Mm.
you know. And my neighbor right beside me on the other side said to me, oh, you know, I have never seen an Indian before.
Wow.
So, you know, they used to call us Paki and, you know, things like that.
But yeah, I
Yeah,
love when
but
they,
those were the 60s and early 70s, okay?
unfortunately, we see some of it still,
Some
but
of it
that's
comes
why
up
things
today.
like this and talking, and we thank you both for sharing your stories and helping us share other stories and the education. And I know there are people also in our audience today that also help share. So thank you all. I'm sorry,
Thank you.
Alita, I guess you couldn't open. I invited you to share, but I guess it didn't work. I hope to share more stories. Please do send me your stories, send me your comments, send me your questions. I will also forward them to Paushali, who also put her email into the list, or I can forward it to Ann as well. So
Yeah.
continue to share, continue to share your pride and to empower yourself through your heritage.
Thank
Can I
you.
just add one little point?
Please.
I feel like this is so important, especially me living in Germany and being German citizen, is, you know, especially in Germany, it's very hard to get people to think beyond the Holocaust. And if anybody has any points to share, how do we get people to acknowledge and accept that there were other Jews, you know, especially in countries like India, and not to just put them aside? I would be really grateful, because it would, I'm very much into Israel advocacy, and it would, I feel, really help me in my advocacy work as well, to because otherwise I feel I'm as it is, if anybody knows, I'm really small and all, and you know, I really it's like, okay, there I am, and I also want to, by the way, talk about the Indian Jews, you know, and they're like, okay.
Yeah.
So
And Dora, one other point, you know, I would love to know how to get the Jewish Board of Education to start including other denominations within the curriculum. Okay? They haven't done it yet. I couldn't get them to do it. Until
So
today,
we have
it's
two
not been done.
challenges that we're sending out, and I encourage you all. And for those who don't know, Jewish Unity Through Diversity has a full 30 lessons online sharing diversity. One of them, it includes the Malida, but we have many others as well from different communities across. And yes, we want them in the schools. Yes, Kulanu is away. Thank you, Judy.
Mhm.
But we want to make sure to get them in the schools across all English-speaking worlds, the English-speaking world and beyond. And
Mhm.
so, and we have your challenge to help
Yeah.
us know how to get the word out there. So I
Yes.
look forward to hearing all your feedback. Thank you for ending it on those challenges. Read their book. I will send the link to the book as well in the follow-up email. So have a wonderful
Thank
rest
you.
of your day wherever you are in the world.
thank you, Drora, and
Thank
thank
you,
you
Dora, for
everyone
having
who
us.
joined.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Okay.